Welcome to the Inala Beginner's Guide to Birdwatching. We want to acknowledge and pay respect to the Palawa people as the original owners and continuing custodians of this land, Luchawisa. Today, we are on Lunawana Alona, also known as Bruny Island, the land of the Neononi.
Welcome. Hello, Kat.
Hello, Kat.
I'm Catherine Davidson.
And I'm Catherine Young.
But we both go by Kat, and some of you may have met us at Inala because we are both Inala tour guides, though we wear a couple of other hats in our lives. A couple of your hats, Kat, are?
I work for ANU, for the Difficult Bird Research Group, and also at UTAS in Hobart.
And I help out with the Bruny Island Bird Festival when I'm not doing Inala tours. So the point of this video today is
to introduce you to birdwatching.
And we're doing it at Inala. We're currently sitting on the Pardalote platform. And so as we're talking, hopefully you may even hear or even see some 40-spotted pardalotes in the background. This is going to be a pretty brief introduction. We could make many hours of tape telling you all the wonders of birdwatching. So this will be short and sweet. Where should we start?
So who can go birdwatching?
Well, absolutely everybody. It is just such a great way of being out in nature. And I'd say most of our guests don't even really think of themselves as just birders. They think of themselves as nature lovers. So you're a nature lover, that's why you're watching this video. And birding is a way of being in nature and interpreting it through watching groovy little birds. So it truly is for everyone.
It is, and you're probably already a bird watcher and you just don't know it. You're probably quite familiar with a lot of the birds that are in your backyard.
Yes.
And I think if you wrote them all down, you'd be surprised by how many you actually do know.
Yes, and if you live in the city, don't think of it as just something that people in the country can do, and don't think you have to travel to the country to do it. You can do it in your own backyard, but also there'll be a park near you or a botanics or just going down by the river. There's so many suburban habitats that the birds love, as well as getting out into the glorious countryside.
Absolutely, and that's a very good way to start, is to get to know the birds around you, and then expand your horizons a little bit as well. So
Yes.
to know your local species.
Yes, as your confidence grows, so will the distance you travel. When thinking about equipment, it's a little bit intimidating if you've never done birdwatching and you see people wandering around with flashy binoculars. So you do not need flashy binoculars. We both have fairly beat up. Cats are more flashy than mine. But
More beat up, I think. Isn't that?
you can start with a super basic pair of binoculars, and you can pay anything from 100 to 10,000 if you wanted to. And it doesn't always mean paying more gets you better. So just start with the ones that are around the house. I'd advise against using the ones that may be your grandparents' ones, because they may be slightly old, slightly out of focus, slightly dusty.
But that could still be a good place to start.
Sometimes, but they may also weigh a kilogram.
Yes.
So there's so many brand names. I recommend making good friends with someone who has a very expensive pair and hoping that they leave them to you in their will. And we're both wearing another piece of gear that you might want to think about, which is the harness. So Kat wears both her harnesses, which is a bit weird. So the regular one that will come with the binoculars is that one.
Just the neck strap?
Yeah. Which can, for some people, be all they ever want. But I am a big lover of this fancy and very fashionable elasticated harness that takes all the strain off your neck, makes the binoculars sit in a lovely spot on your body. They're just great. Why do you have both on there, Kat?
I have both because sometimes I will share the binoculars with other people and it's hard to take the harness on and off, so I will just use the strap if there's somebody with me who wants to share my binoculars.
Whereas I never share with anybody. When I began birding, I didn't use binoculars at all. Was a bit of a weirdo because all the binoculars I'd used were terrible. So I thought binoculars were terrible, not just me, and I should have got a better pair. So in some places you can get away with it because a lot of the birds are big and beautiful and you get used to the way they move. And so don't feel limited if you don't have the time or finance to get binoculars to start birding. Just get out and start looking.
If you do want to get binoculars, a good thing to remember is that they're going to come with two numbers. So it'll say a number times by another number. So the first one is just the magnification. So for birdwatching binoculars, we usually go for a 10 times or an 8 times. So this is the zoom really. And the higher the number, the more zoom you can get, but it also gives you a much smaller field of view. So it makes it a little bit harder to find the bird when you're looking through the binoculars.
I'd say most of our guests use an 8 rather than a 10. 8 is kind of the most popular.
Yes.
And then 32 or 42 is the numbers you usually see after that.
Yes, and the bigger the number, the more light gets into the binoculars, but it can also make them a little bit heavier as well, so not so good for travelling. And also if you have a harness around your neck, it gives you a bit more neck strain. So just pick something that works best for you, and remember that what works for somebody else might not work for you, so try out a few different ones if you can.
Yeah, and you can use them if you're a glasses wearer. And the thing that helps some glasses wearers is twisting these bits here on the binoculars, and when you twist them out, apparently it makes it more comfortable for the eyes. You see a lot of people twist them. And then the only thing you ever need to do while you're using your binoculars is focusing. And there is the focus knob in the middle, and you'll be continually twizzling that around, so you'll just find that your finger will just permanently be sitting on it. Often when we go out, you kind of set it to a middle point before you even walk out the door, and that means the first bird you come across, no matter what distance it is from you, you don't have to roll the entire way across to find the right focal point. You've already got a nice middle starting point to get going. I apparently have mine super loose, and I get chastised by people for having them super loose. Do you have yours that loose?
I've never really thought about how loose mine are, but no, I don't.
Personal preference, but I lost count of the amount of people who've told me off that I should tighten my binoculars. It's your choice. What else can we tell you about this? Scopes. We have one in between us here. This is more for a bird that's very far away or is sitting very still and is going to give you time to get onto it. So binoculars is for a bird that's moving more rapidly or is fairly close. And then shorebirds, you'll see people use scopes a lot. I mean, it's the full nerdy birdie kit. When you're walking with your scope and your binoculars, you really look the part. Do you enjoy scopes?
I do enjoy scopes. Like you say, for shorebirds is really why I have one. So it's got that extra magnification, so you can see more details on the birds that are further away, which is really what you need for shorebirds, because they can be quite tricky to separate.
Yes, and as a beginner birder, you may not wish to immediately start with shorebirds. You may wish to enjoy them en masse, but I don't feel you have to start IDing all the shorebirds to begin with, because they are the trickier end of the birding spectrum. And you'll find some people get very, very into shorebirds, and other birders think they're a little bit strange.
Exactly.
You will find if you're carrying a scope for quite a while, it can hurt your shoulder. At least I do find that. So again, the weight of the thing that you're buying is something to consider.
So when you are looking for a bird through your binoculars, the best thing to actually do is to look at the bird with your eyes and then lift the binoculars to your face. So that way the bird will already be in your field of view when you start looking through your binoculars. Otherwise you end up doing a bit of this.
Yes, which is a very common thing to do when you're starting birding, so don't feel too silly, but it also is hard work to find a bird through binoculars when you're hunting for it with them. Whereas when Kat says when you already know where it is, especially if you notice what it's sitting next to, if it's right next to a V in the tree or right next to a little stump, go for that with your binoculars then, because you've kind of got a really good marker point for where the bird is, and you can go straight to it. And the more you do it, the smoother it will become until you're not even thinking about it. You'll see photographers do it as well as birders, and of course birders are photographers and vice versa, but they'll be holding the camera right up, looking with their eyes, and then they're changing to the lens. So just do the same with the binoculars.
Absolutely. And if you see a bird flying past really fast, or is really close to you, then just to have a look with your eyes rather than trying to chase it with your binoculars.
Yes. These are not compulsory for every single bird. Do just enjoy them with these two wonderful binoculars that come on your body. And especially, as Kat says, when they're moving. If there's a raptor hooning across the sky and you're just, wah, you're never going to see a single feature of it.
You'll probably fall over too.
You probably will, and get mocked a lot. But if the raptor starts to hover over you, if it's something fabulous like a kestrel or something and it's just holding its own spot, then you can really get the binoculars on it and have a good shot. And if you're amazingly lucky, you can have a chance with your camera. But that usually comes second. A lot of birders who are photographers will carry both at the same time, and usually you'll tend to see they will look first with their binoculars to really enjoy the bird, and then if the bird is being nice and compliant and staying around, then go for the shot. Because if you simply go for the photograph first, you might miss the bird entirely.
Absolutely. And cameras can also be a good tool for bird watching. So a lot of people will use a camera instead of binoculars.
Yeah.
And you also have that added bonus of being able to look at the photo when you get home if you have a particularly tricky ID.
Going out birding with someone, that's another big getting started tip. If you go out solo, you've only got one set of eyes. Whereas if you go out with a couple friends, you've got eyes in all directions to get onto the bird in the first place.
And it particularly helps if at least one of those friends knows a little bit about birds, because that's the best way to learn, is with somebody who can point things out to you as you are out looking at the bird and can tell you how they have ID'd that particular species.
Yes, yes. Don't pick a giant know-it-all, though. You'll want to strangle them by the end. Right, onwards. Birding behaviour. So, the onus is on us when we are out in nature to behave well, because it's our privilege to be out in nature. And a couple of things that we should be doing.
So you should be talking in quiet tones. Don't go out and yell and scream about the birds that you've seen, because they will all disappear very, very quickly. So quiet tones. You don't necessarily need to whisper. The birds know you're there, they've seen you,
Totally.
so you just need to be respectful of their space. And also wearing neutral colours. Don't wear any really strong perfumes or deodorants unless you want to be kicked out of the bird hive. That's nothing to do with the birds, that's just a bit of a personal preference.
Interesting too, you were saying about the quiet tones, the moderate tones. I read an interesting thing saying that as long as it's a consistent tone, can even be fairly loud sometimes, because again, you say the bird knows we're there. So yeah, it's more that they don't want to see you as a threat. So it's the sudden noises, the loud noises.
And on the same note, also sudden movements. So often if you're just standing quite still, birds will get quite comfortable with your presence, but if somebody suddenly points in particular, they will suddenly vanish.
The old pointing chestnut.
Yes.
You'll see occasional people do elbow points, subtle elbow points, or eyebrows. There's a bird over there.
Exactly.
Yes. Or you point with your binoculars a little too. That's a handy little flick. Just up. It's less of a movement than a huge old point. But it's such a natural thing to point. You'll have to rein yourself in initially. Distance. So you see your lovely bird and it's out in the field feeding and you'd like to get a little bit closer to get a better look. Start to really watch the bird's behaviour. And if you see that bird starting to hunch like it's about to fly, or every time you take a step, it takes a step, then you're probably too close. So you got to pick a sweet spot where you can see it, but you're still a good respectful distance and you aren't totally disturbing that bird's feeding behaviour, or it could be protecting a nest. So you don't want to be too close. Judge it carefully.
And if you do get too close, you will flush the bird and it'll fly away. And that's not only not nice for the bird, but it can make you very unpopular with your birding friends as well, if you're in a group.
And flush is another birding term for you just causing the bird to go up. And so sometimes you can do it completely accidentally. Something like a bronzewing. Very often you're walking along a forest trail and then poof, bronzewing goes up in front of you. And you didn't mean to flush it, but you have. So you just say sorry and you carry on. All right. So Field guides. We have a beautiful stack in front of us here that hopefully you can see on the camera. The top 2 or 3 there are field guides. And field guide means...
So a field guide is a guide that you take out into the field with you, and it'll have pictures, either drawings or photos, and we'll be pointing out the key features of the bird that'll help you ID it, including where they live, so their distribution around Australia, and also the habitat that they could be found in, and it'll often have a little description of their call as well.
Yeah, it's quite funny when you try to write down a bird call. People have to really think it through and say, too-wee, too-woo, too-woo, boo-boo, ba-doop. Yes, it's amusing. Male and female images is really handy, a juvenile versus an adult. Many birders will have a favourite, whether they have a favourite book they really love or a favourite style of illustration. They might prefer drawn illustrations rather than photographs. Some books have both. You'll find what you like the best. But start with something that's local to your area rather than... I mean, the Big Blue Bible here of Australian birds is fantastic, but you probably don't want to carry that around with you if you don't generally leave your own city. Find someone who's written one for the local area.
Yeah, and there are lots of them around. So just ask your local birders as well, and they'll be able to tell you, point you in the right direction.
Yeah, or take one out of the library until you know if you like it or not. So in this modern era, we don't just have to use books. There are lots of apps on the market. I know that you use some, Kat. What do you use?
Yes, so I use the Morecambe app just because it was the first one to come out. So
yes.
It's the one that I first used and the one that I'm used to. But there are a couple more now. There's also a Pizian Night app. And Cornell Birds in the US have released an app. So they've got an Australian package.
And it's free.
So the apps can be great because it's much easier to carry around your phone. It can be harder as a beginner because it's nice to be able to flick through the pictures in a book. And in an app, you have to know where in the app to be looking to get a start. But it can be very handy to just have it in your pocket.
Yeah, and I think the Merlin one has got it can work through with you what you might be seeing. So is it big, is it small, what's its predominant colours, and it starts eliminating things until you're left with only a couple of possibilities. So some of them do assist you with the IDing there too.
And they can also limit it by area as well. So it'll only tell you what birds are in your local area.
Yeah. The other feature of an app is getting to hear the bird call. And at home, that is a really good place to practice with listening to the call, because it's a big part of birding is listening. And it is best to do it in your home, because you'll probably be replaying it quite a lot, and you might be going through, there might be, say, 5 or 6 different versions of the call, and you might listen to them all. And if you do that out in the field, it can be quite disruptive to the birds. So do practice listening to calls in your home. I use listening a lot with my birding, and so often practice before I've even seen a bird for the first time ever. If I'm going to a new area, I'll sit at home and listen to the calls just so I can link into them as soon as I hear them for the first time. A final wee trick I sometimes like to do is to record in the field if I really don't know what something is, and then the apps are super handy to do a comparison when you're back at home.
Another thing you can do when you're back at home is there's a great website called Xenocanto, which people will also upload calls. If you've got any that are particularly good that you've recorded, you could upload them to there as well, so other people can use them as a reference as well.
Indeed. Now, a couple of general tricks of the trade. Size. Judging the bird's size. You'd think this would be fairly easy, but sometimes, especially when you're in the bush and everything is quite thick or everything is very different shades of greens and browns, you might not get a good perspective on how far away that bird is and what size it is. So if you already know the size of something that you have frequently, a pigeon, you can mentally go, is that bigger than a pigeon or is that smaller than a pigeon? And then that will help you with knowing what you're looking at too.
Yeah, and you could have a few different things in mind. So maybe you have a lot of sparrows around your house or magpies, and you can have them as a size reference in your mind.
And that helps too when you're describing, because when you're out with friends and maybe they haven't even seen where the bird is, and you're just giving them descriptors, the better you can get at saying, so it's just next to that stump and it's about the size of a pigeon and you can only just see the head at the moment, then they know what they're looking for. Whereas if it's a teeny tiny something hiding behind a leaf, they're going to start looking in a very different way.
Absolutely. So size is very important, but also shape is very important as well. And in particular, the shape of the bill can be a very good start for knowing where to look in your bird guide. So, for example, a honeyeater will have quite a long curved bill for getting honey out of getting nectar out of flowers, or ducks have quite that flat bill for sifting through waters. So, the bill will tell you about their feeding habit and often tells you about what they're related to and where to find them in the book.
And like Darwin's famous finches, it does tell you an awful lot about how they live and how they feed. So bills are awesome.
Absolutely. So the silhouette of the bird in general can be quite useful. So not only the shape of the bill, but also how it's sitting. If it's quite upright or if it's leaning forward a lot, that can be a really big help.
Yes. And when you really get your eye in, even within one grouping, things do sit differently, have different posture and stance. So yeah, silhouette's awesome. Kat had a really nice example of saying all the superheroes that you don't need to see their internal details to know when you see Batman versus Spider-Man. If you just saw the silhouette of it, you just immediately know. And the same thing happens with birds. If you see them enough times, your subconscious just learns that silhouette equals at least maybe that family of birds. Even if you don't know the specific parrot, you at least know it's a parrot, just because your brain just immediately tells you it is.
So that leads us into another quite common birding term, which is the jizz. So it means the general impression of size or shape, and it's exactly that. So it's when you get a glimpse of a bird, and just by the feeling of the way it moves, the size and its shape, that you can tell what it is. So a lot of birders will say that, and it can be quite frustrating as a new birder. You say, "How did you know what that bird was?" And they will say, "It's just the jizz."
Yeah. Or I just know, like somehow they were born knowing. Yeah. It's just time. And don't be hard on yourself if it takes a while. Learning takes a while.
Exactly.
So be kind to yourself.
So it can also be very tempting when you first see a bird to look at the colour. But colour can be quite deceptive. We all see colour in very different ways. And colour can also be subject to the light. So if it's in the shadow or if it's in the sun, the same colour can look very, very different. So it's often a good idea, you do want to note down the colour, but you probably want to note more the colour pattern. So whether the bird is all one colour, or whether it maybe has a different coloured head to body, maybe it has a particularly striking colour patch like a yellow on the wing, can be very important and helpful.
And the names of birds in Australia can be quite long, and often they are very descriptive. So, black-faced cuckoo shrike. I mean, that's a very long example, but lots of them are like that, just lots of words put together. So a yellow-throated honeyeater, unsurprisingly, has a yellow throat. So if you're looking out for colours and you notice that yellow throat and you remember it when you're looking in your book later, it's an excellent little ID feature. But as Kat's saying, super variable, and juveniles can be a really tricky time of year. If you're doing birding in spring, late spring, everything might confuse you. And they confuse long-term birders. So again, don't feel bad. You'll find the forums on Facebook are full of people asking for IDs on things which once they're told they feel silly because it's something they know well, but they've just seen a juvenile. All right. Behaviour was another final little trick. Is some bird families all have very characteristic behaviour, like a bobbing off a head in lots of the ones which are like gruriforms and other ones like that. So that can be really handy, just seeing the way it moves and its behaviour. Or scraping the ground. You might know it's a log runner or a thrush just from what it's up to.
And its habitat as well.
Yes,
so
yes.
If it's in a field or if it's in a tree, or if it's maybe on a lake as well.
Yes, it does help narrow it down. If it can't fly at all, you've narrowed it down to penguin and native hen if you're in Tasmania. Right.
So it's interesting you mentioned Facebook groups before.
Yes.
So groups on Facebook and Instagram can be really useful for helping you ID any tricky birds.
Yes.
But they can also be a really good way to learn about birds. So if you join your local birding group or follow a hashtag on Instagram, you'll see lots of photos pop up of birds that are regularly seen in your area. And people will almost always post an ID with them. So you can not only look at the bird itself and get to know what species are in your area, but you can often get an idea of the habitat that people are looking in as well.
Yes.
By looking at the background of the photos.
Yes. It can also waste your entire life. There's so many groups and there are perpetual amounts of people posting on all of them. So, I have to limit how much time I spend looking at bird photos online or I'd have no friends.
That's true. It is sometimes better just to get out and look at them yourself.
Yes. Going out with different people. Don't get stuck in the same little group all the time, because you'll find the moment you go out with someone new for the first time, they'll tell you a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't know, and you'll tell them a bunch of stuff they didn't know. It's a really good way. It's such a joy, our job, going out with different guests all the time, because they're seeing things for the first time, so there's always that fresh joy. But they're bringing with them their knowledge of birding from all over the world to us, and we're perpetually learning off them, and little tricks from them all the time too. I love going out with new people.
Absolutely.
Unless they're noisy, pointy, wearing perfume people. We don't go out with them. Right. Oh, and hides. Hides is another, we could maybe have had this back up in the equipment thing, but you don't need to ever use a hide unless you wish to. And often people who use hides, who buy one for themselves, maybe photographers, who are always looking for one extra way to be a bit sneaky. And they might go and sit in that hide before it even gets light in the day. And then hopefully the bird doesn't even know they're there. And then they can get really lovely close images. But at Inala, we have an amazing luxury hide, to which you do not need to go in the cold, dark, early morning. You can just go in when you've had your breakfast and you have Wi-Fi and heat, and you can sit there looking out of this amazing glass that the birds can't see through, but you can see out of, and you're lovely and close. So there are hides around the world that you can use that are permanently set up in that way.
And we are in one right now as well. So
True.
The Pardelote hide has been here for quite a long time, so the birds are quite used to it being here and used to people being on it. So that's another advantage of hides, is that the birds around there are often quite used to people.
Yes, being in that spot. So you might come across a hide in a park that you think is utterly useless and has been built by someone who has not ever looked at a bird. But it does still have a purpose, because as Kat says, the birds know that humans go to this place and stand there and don't hurt me. So even if you think that it's not hiding you in any way, it still can be beneficial to go into a hide in a park that's been set up. Terminology is our next and final area. Usually terminology is pretty fun. I like all the silly and useful words that come with birding. Most hobbies have got a kind of language that come with them. Birding's no different. Do you have any favourite terms?
Well, we've been through a couple already. So the jizz. There's a lot of terminology in the regions of the bird. So sometimes, there'll be obvious ones that So yellow throat. So people say that, the colour of the throat. But then there's other ones that you might be less familiar with. So like the vent is the area underneath the bird's tail by his bum. Or primary feathers is another common one. So the primary feathers are the first feathers on the wing, and they can often have a different colour than the rest of the wing, so they can be a useful feature to look at.
I think one of my favourites is the supercilium, which is a fancy word for eyebrow, really. It's kind of the bit above the eyebrow in a way. And we do use it in English language when we say someone is being supercilious and they're raising their eyebrow at you. So if you hear someone saying the supercilium is blue, they're just above the eye. But never feel afraid to ask someone what on earth they're talking about. Language can be a bit exclusionary sometimes if people think you're already familiar with it. So don't feel silly, just ask. And most of us should not use the terms. We're just showing off. So, don't be impressed.
All right.
And recording. So you've got going, you've got your equipment, you've been out, you've had a fabulous morning. And now what to do with all that knowledge?
So a lot of people will have a little notebook with them and be recording what they're seeing in their notebook. Or other people will just put it straight onto their phone. So there's a number of apps that you can use. There's, eBird and Bird Data are probably the main ones. And if you put in your sightings into those apps, then they can be used for research as well. So, having it in your notebook is nice for you, but if you just take that extra step and put it online, then it can actually help with conservation as well.
I'm just hearing a 40 spot clicking away behind us.
Yes.
I'm not an app user. I don't know whether it's just because I'm lazy or I just never have felt the need to, but I should do to contribute to science for sure. But the other reason people are doing it is to build lists.
Yes.
Now, not every birder is a lister and not every lister is... No, every lister is a birder. Are you a lister?
I used to be a lister, but I used to tick off actually in my bird book what birds I had seen, and then I lost a bird book, and that all went out the window a little bit. So I am no longer sort of got out of the habit of it. But a lot of people are very dedicated listers.
For sure.
And it can be a fun thing to do. It can be a little bit competitive. A lot of people will get quite competitive over it. You can have your own list, or you can just personal list, or you can share it on one of these apps or on a website. But it's your list, so it's your rules really. And you can have a garden list, a suburb list, a year list, a day list. The possibilities are endless, but it can be really good for helping you remember birds as well, just to write a list. So you can remember on this day I saw these birds, and then that'll help you jog your memory while you're learning them. And also if you wanted to go back and find a particular species, it can be helpful too. So don't feel pressure to write a list, but it can be really good.
I've survived quite well without. But yeah, it brings a lot of joy to a lot of people, so it may be right up your alley. And now that people have seen a lot of birds, some people around the world, they often start brand new lists for photographing those birds. So they start at 0 and they go around the world again to try and get them all on camera, which is even harder.
Yes. So if you were wanting to write a list in a notebook, some good things to list would be the date that you saw the bird, the species. If you can tell the age or the sex of the bird, so if it's for example, a robin, they're quite obvious which one, the male and the female, because of the bright coloration of the male. That can be an interesting thing to note. And also if you wanted to, the behaviour as well. So that can also help you with your learning different birds.
Yeah. So looking back on your early notes too, you might then laugh at yourself a little. So that you'll change over time, the things you write down, as you work out what's most of use to you.
100%. And of course the place. Don't forget to write down the location.
Which takes us neatly into etiquette, because place can sometimes be something which maybe you might not tell many other people. If it's an endangered species, or usually if it's an endangered species is the reason not to spread that knowledge too far, because that particular bird might be very vulnerable in that place. So there's certain birds on the apps which as soon as you add them, it blocks telling anyone else where that bird is to be found, just so that people don't go back and harass that bird. Because each individual that goes has no intention of causing any harm to that bird. It's the cumulative effect of many, many of us visiting that one bird over time.
And the same for private property. So, yes, never go on to private property if you don't have permission to see a bird. It does not go down very well.
No. Even the binoculars can be a little intimidating for someone who's in their kitchen and then you're looking in their garden. You know, it can feel pretty weird. So always be very conscious of the fact that, you know, you are looking quite intently into private land, even if you're not on the land.
Yes. And a lot of the apps as well will have a little box you can tick to say that you want to keep the location hidden, so that, people maybe aren't tempted to go onto a private property to see a particular species that they really, really want to. But you also have to keep it in mind if you're posting on social media as well, that, some locations, because of private property or because of conservation reasons, might need to be kept a little bit private.
Yeah. And it feels rather unnecessary to say, because we know we're talking to people who love nature, who are probably very conservation-minded anyway, and you are wanting to go out and be respectful at all times. But one of the things that sometimes has cropped up with, say, a photography competition is someone may have broken a branch away to get a better image. So that is, of course, very bad etiquette. So we try not to disturb or destroy anything that we can help.
And the same goes for walking off paths, you're bashing through the bush. Be very mindful that you might not be the only person doing this, even if you can't see anybody else at the time.
Yeah, it's very much that cumulative. And as well as, of course, respecting the birds always and all other nature around you, other birders. There's an etiquette with other people. And most of that will just be absolutely natural to you with being in groups. It is just being kind and thoughtful to each other. But sometimes the excitement of the moment can take over, rather. And if it's something that's rather rare, people's elbows can get a little more pointed than usual. So yeah, there's just always being thoughtful and kind.
So possibly one of the most important points in this section is about the use of playback. So we mentioned earlier about using calls on apps in your own home to learn them. But some people will also use them when they're out in the field to draw birds in, particularly for photographs, to get a better look at them. But you just have to be very mindful that when you're doing this, you are disturbing the bird from its natural behaviour. And it might seem to you that it only disturbs it for a minute or two and then it'll go back to doing what it was before. But for some birds, it can actually disrupt their whole day, and it can cause them a lot of stress. And you might think that you're the only person doing this, but then somebody will come along a few hours later or the next day and do the same thing. So you just need to be very aware that you are disturbing birds.
Yes, use it to absolute minimal, if at all. And as the science comes in on how disruptive it is across the world, a lot of national parks are starting to ban it now. So you will start seeing signs up saying no callback or playback. So always be very mindful of that too.
Yeah. If you're being respectful of the birds, and you always have their best interests in your mind, then we should all be able to get along just fine.
Absolutely. Well, that has covered most of what we wanted to put in this beginner's video. I really hope you got something from it. We have enjoyed making it. We'd really love to see you out in the bush, out on tour, engage with us online. Enjoy your birding.
Happy bird watching.